Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай де факто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Канад Улсаас Монгол Улсад суугаа Элчин сайд ноён Дэвид Спроул оролцож байна.
Дэвид Уиллиам Спроул Канад Улсаас Монгол Улсад суугаа Элчин сайд. Дэвид Спроул 1981 онд Канадын гадаад иргэн яамд гадаад албаны ажилтан болсноор ажлын гараагаа эхэлсэн. Түүнээс хойш Сингапурт 2-3 дугаар нарийн бичиг, Бангкок хотод 1-р нарийн бичиг, Вашингтон хотод элчин зөвлөх гэх мэтээр олон оронд томилогдсон ажилласан. Тэрээр Канад улсын Оттава хот дахь гадаад иргэн яамд эдийн засгийн бодлого, дээд хэмжээний уулзалт хариуцсан хэлтсийн дэд захирал, хүний эрхийн хуулийн хэлтсийн дэд захирал, ерөнхий сайдын дэргэдэх тусгай зөвлөлийн ажлын алба дахь мэдээллийн боловсруулалт хариуцсан газарт Азийн асуудал эрхэлсэн хэлтсийн захирал, Далай тэнгис байгаль орчны эрх зүйн газрын захирал, хүний эрх нэгдсэн үндэсний байгууллага болон эдийн засгийн хууль зүйн газрын захирал, хууль зүйн товчооны ерөнхий захирлын албыг тус хашиж байжээ. Дэвид Спроул Монгол улсад томилогдохоос өмнө Афганистан, Таиланд, Норвеги болон Лив улсуудад элчин сайдаар ажилласан.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You have been to very hot places, hot places like Bangladesh, Afghanistan, then Norway ambassador, now Mongolia, and you're already in 1.5 years here.
Yes.
How do you find your job?
Oh, it's terrific. Mongolians are easy to work with. There are a lot of similarities between our countries, climate-wise, in terms of people, challenges like communications, and dealing with our climates. I find the whole apparatus here, government, private sector, very accessible. Mm-hmm. It's easy to do business here, mm-hmm. And it's a great environment to live in, especially outside the capital, mm-hmm. when you get out to the provinces and, mm-hmm. and see the traditional way people have lived for hundreds of years.
Was there any particular differences between your expectation and the reality you have seen in terms of remote Mongolian areas where the people live, nomads live? How do you find?
Well, I find the countryside actually more beautiful and stunning than I expected. And I've been to some beautiful countries. So it was very striking. And I also have been pleasantly surprised about really the level and sophistication of the business community and the development in Ulaanbaatar as well.
This year we celebrate 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between two countries. What particular features this time in the relations?
Well, it's also significant because this is the 10th anniversary of our embassy establishing itself here. Mm-hmm. And I think that really marked a development in terms of our commercial and economic relations that coincided with that. That is the advent of a large-scale investment from Canada here, and that's important. Insofar as Canada's presence here, I think you've seen it rapidly increase as Mongolia has moved towards a market economy and a democratization of its institutions.
Let's talk about the size of the investment. It's one of those, certainly, not only by volume, but by that, the role it plays in the largest sector of the economy. Please brief us about that.
Well, I think that it's quite natural and understandable that Canadian investors would be investing in the mining sector. In part because Canada has such a long and large history in mining. It goes on in almost all our provinces. It is one of the backbones to our economy. We've had to learn, sometimes by trial and error, how best to manage our mining industry to maximize the benefits for Canadians and protect the environment and enhance investment incentives for those who wish to come to Canada and participate in the mining industry. And a lot of those lessons and experience our investors bring here, I think, to the benefit of Mongolia and Mongolians.
Mm-hmm. And what is the size of total investment? How many companies are from Canada or Canada registered or Canada listed?
Well, I couldn't tell you, but I think it's pretty much restricted or almost wholly to the mining industry. But it's not just the investors, but it's the suppliers and the contractors who come with that. So that in turn helps in terms of bringing expertise, jobs, and then that extends to the Mongolian economy, which is stimulated by having that investment here. As you know, there are increasing numbers of Mongolian companies that are assuming the full aspect of the mining participation here. And that's a benefit to both the Canadian investor to have that kind of talent here, but also to the Mongolian economy.
Mongolian delegation goes almost every year, as much as I remember, almost since the last 20, 25 or so years, to the largest mining expositions in the world, which is happening in Toronto every March, PDAC, right?
Yes.
And when you come, I was several times there, when you come to that exhibition, you really feel that the whole world mining industry, not today, very hard to imagine without Canada. And as you said, the whole sector of value chain, your technology, your expertise, and your standards are quite dominant. In that sense, how much Mongolian mining sector you think replicating or learning from the mining sector of Canada, in particular in the government level?
Well, when Canada became a big investor here in Mongolia, our government decided also to complement that with trying to help Mongolia develop its regulatory regime and its management of the mining sector. So we have two very large programs here, multi-million-dollar, multi-year programs, which primarily assist the government in terms of how to manage the industry to the best benefit of Mongolians. For example, how to protect the environment, how to encourage investors to come, how to establish regulatory standards, how to improve revenues from the mining industry. So Canada felt that it had a responsibility to not only be an investor, but to be a helper and a partner with Mongolia in terms of the development of its industry.
Speaking about the mining sector revenue management, I have noticed in Canada this, we call it royalty, goes not only to the mining areas, but also non-mining areas, so that the countries, there are certain shares which goes to non-mining areas as well from the mining areas. How all this work, and why is that so?
Well, mining in Canada is overseen at the provincial level. In fact, mineral resources are within the jurisdiction of provinces, and so therefore they each have their own decision-making to make in terms of the royalties and the taxes charged, and they in turn as governments have to decide how to spend those revenues. Some of the revenues that are derived, of course, go into helping local communities, both, for example, indigenous communities, which might be around about mine sites, but also protecting the environment. And then also in terms of setting down pretty stringent requirements for the companies so that their investment benefits not only the provincial government as a whole, but the local communities, and those areas. Needless to say, some of the tax revenue goes to assist the government doing all the things the governments do, provide roads and infrastructure, social programs for the residents of the province and so on. So that means that the provincial governments see revenue from the mining industry as essential to their economic health.
So that's because the benefit of the local mine mostly goes to the provincial people under the management of the provincial government.
Yeah, that's true. The royalties and the corporate taxes. There, of course, will be taxes paid by the corporations if they're incorporated federally, and also the employment income, of course, of those who work and benefit from the mines is shared between the provinces and the federal government. But primarily the responsibility and the benefits derived from the mining industry go to the provinces.
Do you have, or have you had before, state-owned mining companies?
We've had state-owned resource companies, but Canada has divested itself of most of state-owned resource companies, such as oil companies, in part because I think there is an appreciation, there's a general trend for privatization for the last 3 or 4 decades now, but also I think there's a recognition that it's better for Canada and the governments to become regulators. You know, I always look at it as governments have this huge advantage and benefit that they can regulate, and therefore they can derive benefits, royalties, and taxes without actually accepting the risk themselves of being shareholders in companies that do it.
Which is not the case, unfortunately, with our government, and where our government is not only regulating, but is becoming a large player in the field. And sometimes that controversy or the conflict of interests are not playing always for the benefit of whole sector players. And that's why, for example, today there are certain controversies in our regulations, sometimes choose between these two, player and regulator. How do you find today, for example, the commercial income tax cases in Mongolia where we have certain problems, discussions, in particular among investors? What is your take?
Well, the issue you raise about state having an ownership share in the companies, I think a lot of that goes back to thinking from times past. The state must have some ownership share. The difficulty is it sometimes puts the state in a conflict of interest situation when they're both the benefactors as company shareholders from the investment, but they're also there to regulate, oversee, and derive revenues as a government of the people. And I think those two things come into conflict at some times. As far as corporate income tax is concerned, I do know that the industry was concerned about a tax that was imposed in the last budget, which taxed corporations for the transfer of licenses, mining licenses. They would pay a 30% tax when a license was transferred. Now, I think the government wanted to discourage speculation in mine licenses. But I think what they may have inadvertently done is discouraged mining exploration. Canada, for its part, asked experts to come to Mongolia and provide the government with our experience on how to discourage speculation in mine licenses. And we do it through things like establish rules for when exploration must take place, how much can be done, adherence to environmental standards. Those are the things to encourage active and beneficial exploration and discourage mere speculation. And they've worked for us. I think the mining industry would prefer an approach a little along the latter lines as opposed to the tax that was imposed kind of unexpectedly for many of the investors.
How is that situation in Canada when you transfer license, right, from one to another?
Well, there isn't a tax, a specific transfer tax imposed, but the new owner has to adhere to the rules that were established for the giving over of the license. And that includes rules about how much exploration must go on, proof of activity, payment of the taxes that go with it from the profits and the royalties, and then, of course, protections for the environment.
So, but there is no tax on that transfer itself?
No.
And it is, the new owner is to continue the program, exploration program approved by the state when they were given the original licenses.
That's right.
You were saying about the Canada helping Mongolians to protect the environment in mining, exploration and production businesses. What kind of programs are you implementing now in Mongolia in that sense?
Well, for example, last year we gave over to your Ministry of the Environment surveillance equipment to be able to monitor the use of the land from the air. That's one way you can keep track. Also, requirements in terms of reporting about meeting technical standards and how those are overseen and monitored.
Is it kind of drone type of what?
Well, in the first case, yes, they were drones.
The surveillance, they go and check and compare with the...
They can go over the mine site and see before and after and the developments and see if there are any negative changes that are going on so that those can be rectified.
And that technology you use in Canada to verify?
Yes.
And any result so far, or?
Well, I think what it does is it's a very much a preventative measure, so that if a problem would be perceived, then the company gets together with the government and they say, this has to be remedied. Let's figure out how to do it in the best way possible.
It's a matter of also training people?
Oh yes, there's a technical experience that comes with it. But actually, things like drone technology are well advanced in Mongolia, but it's a question of orienting them so that they're most useful for regulating the mining industry itself. But that's only one aspect. Much of it has to do with helping also establish the regulations, the writing up of the legislation, making sure that they are consistent with the taxing regime, the role of the officials and how licenses are given out. There's a whole area of regulatory experience that we believe that Mongolia would benefit from in terms of working with Canada in this regard.
Oh yes, I see a lot knowledge infusion from your mining industry. You can clearly follow it from PDAC to PDAC.
Yes.
That what kind of really things are coming to the country in terms of soft infrastructure. The other thing of big concern nowadays is new amendments proposal to currency regulations, laws in Mongolia. What is your business's take on that?
Well, I think the intention is concern about hard currency leaving Mongolia, and therefore giving the central bank some sort of role in terms of controlling or affecting or limiting or somehow affecting the transfer of foreign currency in and out of the country if it so wishes. I think the concerns are twofold. One is it's giving a role to the central bank, which a central bank traditionally doesn't take on. and therefore putting it in a very difficult position. Usually a central bank is there to oversee monetary policy, establish exchange rates. They usually don't get into that kind of business. Second of all, the bringing and taking out of foreign currency is an essential part of any sizable business in a country. And as soon as you get restrictions on that, it really affects the possible viability of the investment itself.
Even if not implemented, the very fact that you have that provisions that they may do anytime they want, that will restrict the foreign investment.
Well, I think that this is perhaps a little bit misunderstood or maybe a little underestimated. Things like those corporate income tax taxes that were imposed on the transfer of licenses and these new provisions, as well as, for example, the parliamentary group that is looking into the investment agreements for Ollogoo. Those are three examples of things which perhaps some of those who are recommending these changes have the best of intentions, but they send a very negative signal to the investment community. They become confused and uncertain about how these new measures will be implemented, whether they will be hurt by them, and they seem to change the rules upon which they made their investments. And all that would be okay if Mongolia was the only investment destination in the world. But you know, money moves where it's most beneficial to do so. And if there's uncertainty created, it won't move into that jurisdiction. You know, I kind of laugh to myself and I say, you know, Canada would like to attract a lot of investment in the mining industry. Maybe some of those companies should come to Canada instead, where we have not imposed some of those rules and some of those uncertainties
in fact,
that we've just
discussed. Very mineral-rich country. A lot of places not properly exploited yet. Exploration is not done there properly, thoroughly all around the country, and in the north and Yukon area, vast areas. And very interesting, in fact, those people were, from the provinces, were coming to that PDAC and promoting exploration.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned PDAC too, because if you go to PDAC, I think you realize how fierce the competition for investment is. And PDAC is a place where companies raise money. And Mongolia has to compete against those who would like those investments and the investment money go to Canada, and against America, where they want to go in America, and Africa, and so on. It's a really competitive place. And when you see hundreds and hundreds of exhibit booths, and you see bankers everywhere, and investors, and lenders, and mining experts, and companies, realize that you have to really present a good product.
And compete with that.
And Canada competes because mining done right is such a benefit in terms of revenue streams for the government, and receiving taxes to in turn do all the things that governments need to do to provide for Canadians.
A couple questions on the public service reform in Mongolia is being supported by your government, by your public service. How is it going on now?
I'm glad you mentioned that. We have a very large multi-year program, multi-million-dollar program, where we are asking the UNDP to help us implement that program. And this is in response to a strong feeling by the Mongolian government that they could improve and professionalize the Mongolian civil service. Canada, and I don't mean to be immodest, but has been rated repeatedly as the top public service in the world. And in terms of transparency, in terms of rules, in terms of continuity of people and professionalizing them. So we hope that maybe we can offer some ideas and some guidance and help with the costs of doing so. For example, I think it's really important in Canada that the public service continues whatever government comes into place. We have that ongoing expertise that whatever happens politically, the ship of government continues. People get their benefits.
After general elections, no single public officer was replaced because the political election changes, right?
That's right. And the reason is because public servants are not politicized.
That's the something that we learn.
That's right.
Need to learn deeper from you. The education field, what's going on in cooperation in education?
Between our countries?
Yes.
We mostly are focusing on various sectors. So, for example, we have a large cooperation program with the Mongolian Armed Forces to bring Canadians over for training in Canada, and to bring trainers over here in various areas, including English and French language training, which will really equip them to cooperate. We cooperate in terms of training and peacekeeping. Both our countries have long histories in that, and that's very useful. We also now are doing police training and doing a lot of
police.
Yeah, among our police. We just had a course a couple of weeks back in conjunction with your big conference here. We're doing it, of course, I said, in the mining industry, training, and we're also developing much more interaction and trying to attract Mongolian students to Canadian universities generally.
How many of them are there now?
We have about 300 right now. I think we could have more. Many of them are focusing on areas that Mongolia really needs. For example, we have quite a few students at UBC studying mining engineering. But more generally, any area, we are welcoming Mongolian students, and our educational institutions actually come here and encourage them to come.
Well, you know, what is happening in between two countries, people are getting to know each other more and more. Still, where you would like to have more things moved forward?
Well, I would like to see more Canadians coming to Mongolia, and I would like to see more Mongolians going to Canada, because I think...
But the visa issue is so hard.
Well, the visa issue is always an issue, but we have to be sure that Mongolians are able to look after themselves when they get to Canada, and that the skills they learn, that they in turn bring them back to help their own country. And so those kinds of restrictions are quite common.
Now, for those who can do that, you said take care of self. How long the multi-year visa they now give? 5 years, 3 years?
No, there's no set amount. It depends on the individual and the purpose for which, and there's various kinds of visas. For one common type is a student visa. And we have made more flexible some of our rules. For example, students who come and study in Canada are now allowed to work in the evenings if they wish, and the weekends and part-time, summer periods. And that in turn allows them to subsidize their education while in Canada.
Is it only for Mongolians, or it is in general?
For everyone.
For everyone.
Mongolians.
And we apply visa for Canada where? Here, or do you issue visa, or we send?
Well, you can apply for, you can come and fill out your applications at our visa application center, which will then send it to our embassy in Hong Kong, who will process the application.
Well, Ambassador, of course we have touched all aspects, many aspects at least, of our cooperation. And there are things a lot we are happy. And there are things we need to learn more, in particular in terms of mining regulations. But what you said and your opinions are important to really to make changes in this area. So I appreciate you, your office here, your job here in that directions, and I wish you good luck in your job here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. За хүн түлхэгчтэй өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Канадын Монголд суугаа элчин сайд ноён Дэвид, Уиллиам, Sproule оролцлоо. Баярлалаа.